What if the biggest threat to your financial future isn't a market crash, inflation, or even a bad investment? What if it's a handful of quiet financial habits you've repeated for years without ever noticing? The truth is, fortunes are rarely destroyed overnight. They're slowly eroded by small decisions that feel harmless in the moment but become devastating over decades. Warren Buffett has spent a lifetime studying not just businesses, but human behavior. And hidden inside his investing philosophy are timeless lessons that can help ordinary people avoid financial ruin before it begins. In this documentary, we're uncovering 8 financial mistakes that silently destroy wealth, steal opportunities, and keep millions of people working far longer than they should. By the end, you'll know exactly what these mistakes are, why almost everyone makes them, and most importantly, how to replace them with habits that quietly build lasting wealth. Imagine watching 2 investors over the course of a single year. The first checks the stock market every few minutes. He's constantly reading financial news, buying one stock, selling another, reacting to headlines, listening to predictions, and chasing the next opportunity before the previous one has even had time to work. His days are filled with activity. He feels productive because he's always doing something. The second investor looks almost lazy by comparison. He spends most of his time reading annual reports, studying businesses, and patiently waiting. Weeks pass without making a single investment. Months go by with almost no visible action. To the outside world, it appears as though nothing is happening. Now here's the surprising question. Which investor is behaving more like Warren Buffett? Most people assume success comes from constant movement. Modern culture rewards speed. We celebrate being busy. We admire people who always seem occupied. If someone is constantly making decisions, switching strategies, or chasing new opportunities, we assume they're getting ahead. But Buffett has spent decades proving the exact opposite. One of the most expensive financial mistakes a person can make is confusing activity with progress. The financial industry quietly encourages this misunderstanding. Every day there are new market predictions, breaking economic headlines, once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunities, and experts telling you it's time to buy or time to sell. The message is simple. If you're not constantly doing something, you're falling behind. But Buffett has never built his fortune by reacting to noise. He built it by ignoring it. Throughout his career, Buffett has often gone long periods without making major investments. People questioned whether he had lost his edge. Critics wondered why he was sitting on billions of dollars in cash while everyone else seemed to be making money. Yet Buffett understood something that most investors never learn. Sometimes the smartest financial decision is choosing not to act. Patience is uncomfortable because it doesn't feel productive. Our brains crave action. We feel safer when we're doing something, even if that something is unnecessary. Behavioral psychologists call this action bias. It's the tendency to believe that taking action is always better than waiting, even when waiting produces better outcomes. This bias doesn't just affect investing. It quietly influences almost every financial decision we make. Someone changes jobs every year hoping the next salary will solve their problems, never realizing their spending habits remain exactly the same. Another person constantly switches investment strategies because they're searching for quick results instead of allowing time to work in their favor. Someone else keeps buying the newest financial courses, apps, and tools, believing success is hidden in the next system rather than in consistently applying the one they already know. It creates the illusion of progress while producing very little actual growth. Buffett's philosophy is remarkably different. He once compared investing to baseball, except with one important difference. In baseball, if you don't swing, the umpire eventually calls a strike. In investing, there are no called strikes. You can watch hundreds of opportunities pass by until the perfect one appears. There's no reward for being busy. There's only a reward for being right. That mindset requires enormous discipline because the world constantly pressures you to move faster. Think about market crashes for a moment. When fear spreads across headlines, millions of investors rush to sell. During market booms, the same people rush to buy because everyone else appears to be getting rich. Their decisions aren't driven by careful analysis. They're driven by the emotional need to do something. Buffett has repeatedly done the opposite. When others panic, he waits. When others become greedy, he becomes cautious. His greatest advantage has never been predicting the future. His advantage is refusing to let the crowd dictate his behavior. This lesson extends far beyond investing. Building wealth isn't about making hundreds of financial decisions every week. It's about making a handful of excellent decisions and giving them enough time to produce extraordinary results. Imagine planting an oak tree. No one digs it up every few weeks to check whether the roots are growing. Yet that's exactly how many people treat their investments. They constantly interfere with long-term plans because they're impatient for immediate proof that they're working. The irony is that the more frequently people chase quick wins, the more they interrupt the very process that creates lasting wealth. Compounding requires consistency. Businesses need time to grow. Investments need time to mature. Skills need time to develop. Financial independence itself is built through years of disciplined behavior, not months of frantic activity. Buffett often spends far more time thinking than acting. To many people, thinking looks like inactivity. But deep thinking prevents costly mistakes. Every investment he avoids is just as important as the ones he makes successfully. And perhaps that's the hidden lesson most people never notice. Wealth isn't usually destroyed because people failed to find enough opportunities. It's destroyed because they couldn't resist acting on opportunities that never should have been pursued in the first place. The challenge, then, isn't learning how to do more. It's learning how to recognize when doing less is actually the wiser move, because the next mistake Buffett warns about begins long before anyone invests a single dollar. It begins with what they choose to understand, and what they blindly choose to ignore. Picture yourself standing in a crowded room where everyone is talking about the same investment. Some people claim it's the opportunity of a lifetime. Others say anyone who doesn't invest today will regret it forever. The excitement is contagious. Friends are buying. Social media is filled with success stories. Financial headlines describe a new era of wealth. Without realizing it, you're no longer making a decision based on understanding. You're making a decision based on emotion. This is exactly where countless financial futures begin to quietly unravel. One of Warren Buffett's simplest rules has protected him for decades, yet it's also one of the most ignored principles in modern investing. He has repeatedly said, never invest in a business you cannot understand. It sounds almost too simple. In a world obsessed with complicated strategies, advanced algorithms, and sophisticated financial products, Buffett's advice feels almost old-fashioned. But history has shown that simplicity often outlasts complexity. The truth is, people don't lose money only because they choose bad investments. More often, they lose money because they invest in things they never truly understood in the first place. Think about how financial trends spread. A new technology appears. A new industry promises explosive growth. A stock suddenly doubles in price, and overnight it becomes the center of attention. The conversation quickly changes from understanding the business to simply asking one question: how much money can I make? That question has destroyed more wealth than almost any market crash. Buffett has always approached investing differently. Before looking at potential profits, he asks whether he can explain the business in simple language. How does the company make money? Why do customers keep buying from it? What competitive advantage protects it? Will it still be valuable 10 or 20 years from now? If those questions cannot be answered with confidence, Buffett simply walks away. Most investors do the exact opposite. They see rising prices and assume rising prices are proof of quality. They mistake popularity for value. They believe if thousands of people are investing, it must be safe. But crowds have never guaranteed wisdom. In fact, financial history is filled with examples where entire crowds confidently walked toward disaster together. Think back to some of the biggest investment bubbles in history. During each one, there were intelligent people who questioned whether prices made sense. Yet their voices were often drowned out by excitement. Greed became louder than logic. The fear of missing out became stronger than the desire to understand. Buffett never allowed that pressure to influence him. In fact, there have been entire industries he deliberately avoided for years simply because they fell outside what he called his circle of competence. This idea became one of the defining principles of his career. Buffett doesn't believe you need to understand everything. He believes you need to clearly understand a few things exceptionally well. That's a powerful lesson because modern culture encourages the opposite. It tells us we should have an opinion on every investment, every cryptocurrency, every startup, every new technology, and every market trend. Buffett quietly reminds us that saying, "I don't know," is often one of the smartest financial decisions anyone can make. There's another hidden cost to investing without understanding. When you don't know why you bought something, you'll never know when to hold it or when to sell it. Imagine buying shares of a company simply because someone online recommended it. A few weeks later, the stock falls 20%. Panic immediately sets in. Was the recommendation wrong? Should you sell? Should you buy more? Because you never understood the business, every price movement feels like an emergency. Now compare that to Buffett's approach. When he owns a business he deeply understands, temporary price declines don't automatically create fear. He knows what he owns. He understands its long-term value. While others panic over short-term headlines, Buffett focuses on whether the business itself has fundamentally changed. That difference in thinking creates an enormous psychological advantage. Knowledge doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but it dramatically reduces emotional decision-making. Buffett has often said that risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. Notice he didn't say risk comes from investing itself. He said risk comes from ignorance. The less you understand, the more every market movement controls your emotions. Every headline becomes frightening. Every rumor feels important. Every prediction influences your next decision. And that's exactly why education has always been Buffett's greatest investment. Long before he became one of the richest people in the world, he invested thousands of hours reading books, studying businesses, analyzing annual reports, and learning from experienced investors. While others searched for shortcuts, Buffett quietly built knowledge that would continue paying dividends for the rest of his life. Most people spend more time researching a vacation than researching where they'll invest years of their savings. They compare hotel reviews for hours but commit thousands of dollars to investments after watching a few minutes of online content. It feels harmless in the moment, but over decades, those decisions quietly separate disciplined investors from emotional speculators. Perhaps the greatest irony is that the market doesn't reward confidence. It rewards understanding. Confidence without knowledge eventually turns into costly mistakes. Understanding creates patience. Patience creates discipline. And discipline becomes the foundation upon which lasting wealth is built. Because once you truly understand what you're investing in, another realization begins to emerge. There is one resource even more valuable than choosing the perfect investment, and unlike money, it's something you can never earn back once it's gone. If Warren Buffett could give every young investor just one gift, it probably wouldn't be money. It would be time. Think about that for a moment. Here is a man who has accumulated one of the greatest fortunes in history, and yet the resource he values most isn't cash, real estate, or businesses. It's years. Because Buffett understands something that most people don't realize until it's far too late. Money can be earned back. Opportunities can return. Markets recover. But time follows only one direction, and every day you delay building wealth is a day that compounding will never give back. One of the quietest financial mistakes people make isn't choosing the wrong investment. It's convincing themselves they still have plenty of time. It starts with harmless thoughts. I'll start saving next year. I'll invest after I get a better job. I'll focus on retirement once the kids are older. I'll build wealth when life becomes less expensive. Those sentences sound reasonable because they don't feel dangerous. In fact, millions of people repeat them every year. But Buffett has spent his life proving that the greatest cost in investing isn't always losing money. Sometimes it's losing years. Imagine planting two identical oak trees. One is planted today. The other is planted 10 years from now. They receive the same sunlight, the same water, and the same care. Yet decades later, one towers over the other. The difference wasn't intelligence. It wasn't effort. It was simply the decision to begin earlier. Money behaves in exactly the same way. Compounding is often called the eighth wonder of the world because it produces results that seem almost unbelievable. In the beginning, progress appears painfully slow. Your investments barely seem to grow. It feels as though nothing meaningful is happening. This is the stage where most people lose patience. They expect dramatic results after a few months, and when those results don't appear, they stop investing altogether. Buffett understood something different. He knew that compounding is invisible before it becomes extraordinary. For years, it rewards discipline with almost no excitement. Then, almost without warning, the growth begins accelerating. The money you've earned starts earning money of its own. Those returns begin producing even more returns. What once seemed insignificant becomes impossible to ignore. This is one of the reasons Buffett's wealth increased so dramatically later in life. Many people assume he became rich because he consistently found better investments than everyone else. While he certainly made exceptional investment decisions, another factor was equally important. He allowed compounding to work uninterrupted for decades. In fact, a large percentage of Buffett's net worth was accumulated after the age of 60. That surprises many people because it challenges the belief that wealth is built quickly. Buffett's story demonstrates that extraordinary financial results often arrive after years of ordinary-looking discipline. Yet our culture encourages exactly the opposite mindset. We're surrounded by stories of overnight millionaires, viral success, instant profits, and people who supposedly became wealthy in months. Those stories capture attention because they're exciting. But they also create unrealistic expectations. People begin believing that if they aren't seeing massive financial progress immediately, they're somehow failing. Buffett's philosophy offers a much calmer perspective. He doesn't chase speed. He respects time. Every dollar invested today becomes an employee that works for you around the clock. That employee generates income, which then hires more employees. Over time, the workforce grows larger without requiring additional effort from you. But if you delay hiring those first employees, the entire process starts later, and that lost time can never be recovered. The tragedy is that most people underestimate this loss because it doesn't feel painful today. Missing 1 year of investing doesn't seem like a crisis. Missing 5 years feels manageable. Missing 10 years barely attracts attention. But by the time people realize what those years were truly worth, the opportunity has already disappeared. They discover that the cost wasn't simply the money they failed to invest. The real cost was every future dollar that money could have created through decades of compounding. Buffett often reminds investors that successful investing isn't about timing the market. It's about time in the market. That distinction changes everything. Instead of asking when conditions will be perfect, Buffett asks whether time can begin working today. Because perfect conditions rarely arrive, there will always be uncertainty. There will always be elections, recessions, inflation, market corrections, global crises, and frightening headlines predicting economic disaster. If investors wait for complete certainty before they begin, they often spend years waiting while compounding quietly passes them by. What's remarkable is that Buffett didn't become one of history's greatest investors because he predicted every market movement. He became extraordinary because he consistently gave compounding exactly what it needed most: time. That same principle applies far beyond investing. Skills compound. Knowledge compounds. Relationships compound. Healthy financial habits compound. Even small improvements in spending, saving, and decision-making create results that appear insignificant at first but become life-changing over decades. The challenge is that human psychology struggles to value delayed rewards. We naturally focus on immediate pleasures instead of future benefits. Buying something today feels satisfying. Investing that same money feels invisible. The reward is delayed, and because it's delayed, many people assume it isn't important. Buffett built his entire financial life by resisting that temptation. He consistently chose decisions that benefited his future self rather than satisfying his present emotions. And that may be the greatest lesson hidden inside the power of compounding. Wealth isn't usually created by one brilliant decision. It's created by thousands of ordinary decisions repeated patiently over many years. But even people who understand compounding can still watch their financial future quietly fall apart if they lose control over one force that Buffett believed was even more powerful than market knowledge itself: human emotion. Imagine two people who start investing on exactly the same day. They earn similar salaries, have access to the same information, and even buy many of the same investments. 20 years later, one has achieved financial independence while the other is still struggling to build wealth. What happened? Most people immediately assume the successful investor must have found better stocks or discovered some secret strategy. But Warren Buffett has spent decades teaching a very different lesson. The biggest difference between successful investors and unsuccessful ones often has nothing to do with intelligence. It has everything to do with emotional control. Buffett once said that investing isn't a game where the person with the highest IQ wins. Instead, it's a game that rewards temperament. In other words, your ability to control your emotions is often far more valuable than your ability to calculate numbers. And yet, this is where millions of financial futures quietly begin to fall apart. The fifth mistake is allowing fear to make financial decisions. Fear rarely announces itself. It whispers. It tells you to sell when markets fall because things might get even worse. It convinces you that protecting yourself means abandoning your long-term plan. During every major market correction, fear spreads faster than facts. Headlines become more dramatic. Television experts predict disaster. Friends begin talking about pulling their money out of the market. Most investors believe they're making rational decisions during these moments. Buffett understands they're usually making emotional ones. Throughout history, every significant market decline has eventually created opportunities for patient investors. Yet most people never benefit from those opportunities because fear forces them to leave precisely when discipline matters most. Then comes the sixth mistake. Greed. If fear tells you to sell too early, greed convinces you to buy too late. Think about how investment bubbles form. Prices begin rising steadily. At first, only a few investors pay attention. Then the success stories begin appearing everywhere. Suddenly, coworkers are discussing investments during lunch. Social media fills with screenshots of profits. News headlines celebrate a new financial era. The opportunity now feels impossible to ignore. But Buffett has always warned investors to become cautious when everyone else becomes excited. His famous advice is remarkably simple. Be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. That sounds easy until real money is involved. Because greed doesn't feel dangerous. It feels exciting. It convinces people they deserve quick wealth. It whispers that this opportunity is different. It promises that prices will continue rising forever. And by the time reality finally returns, many investors discover they weren't investing anymore. They were gambling. The seventh mistake is even more subtle. It's envy. Charlie Munger, Buffett's lifelong business partner, often described envy as one of the most destructive human emotions. Not because it hurts other people, but because it quietly destroys your own judgment. Imagine you've been patiently investing for years, earning steady long-term returns. Then someone tells you they doubled their money in a few months. Through a risky investment, suddenly, your own progress feels slow. Nothing about your financial plan has changed. Nothing about your goals has changed. Only your comparison has changed. Envy quietly shifts your attention away from building your own future and toward chasing someone else's success. Buffett has never measured his performance against whatever happened to be popular that year. He understood that someone will always appear to be making money faster. The question isn't whether someone else is getting richer. The question is whether you're consistently moving toward your own financial goals. Comparison creates impatience. Impatience creates poor decisions. Poor decisions quietly destroy compounding. Then comes the eighth and perhaps most dangerous emotional mistake of all. Ego. Ego convinces people they're smarter than the market. It prevents investors from admitting mistakes. It encourages them to double down on failing decisions simply because admitting they're wrong feels painful. Buffett has never claimed to be perfect. In fact, one of his greatest strengths has been openly discussing his investment mistakes. He understands something that many investors never accept. Losing money on a well-researched decision isn't necessarily failure. Refusing to learn from that mistake is. Ego also appears when people believe they must always have an opinion. Markets rise. They predict higher prices. Markets fall. They suddenly predict disaster. Buffett rarely feels the need to predict the future because he knows predictions don't create wealth. Disciplined decisions do. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about Buffett's career is that his emotional behavior has remained remarkably consistent across decades of changing markets. Booms didn't make him reckless. Crashes didn't make him panic. Success didn't make him arrogant. Criticism didn't make him abandon his principles. That consistency became one of his greatest competitive advantages. Because markets constantly test human emotions. Some days they'll tempt you with excitement. Other days they'll frighten you with uncertainty. Sometimes they'll convince you everyone else knows something you don't. Other times they'll make you question every decision you've ever made. The market is unpredictable. Human emotion is predictable. And Buffett built his fortune by mastering the second instead of trying to predict the first. When you step back and look at these 8 financial mistakes together, a surprising pattern begins to emerge. They don't usually destroy wealth overnight. They work quietly, almost invisibly, through ordinary decisions repeated over many years. Living without a margin of safety. Mistaking busyness for progress. Investing in things you don't truly understand. Waiting too long to let compounding begin. Allowing fear, greed, envy, and ego to sit in the driver's seat. None of these mistakes feel catastrophic in the moment, which is exactly why they become so dangerous over a lifetime. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson Warren Buffett leaves us with. Financial success isn't built by making a few spectacular decisions. It's built by consistently avoiding the ordinary mistakes that quietly steal your future long before you ever realize they're happening. Conclusion. As we come to the end of this journey, it's worth remembering that Warren Buffett's greatest lesson has never been about finding the perfect stock or predicting the next market rally. His real lesson is far more timeless. Wealth is built long before money appears in your bank account. It begins with the decisions you make when no one is watching, the habits you repeat every day, and the discipline to think differently when everyone else is chasing shortcuts. The 8 financial mistakes we've explored today aren't dramatic events that suddenly ruin a person's life. They are quiet choices. Spending everything instead of creating a margin of safety. Staying busy instead of being patient. Investing without understanding. Waiting too long to let time work in your favor. Allowing fear to control your actions, greed to cloud your judgment, envy to distract your focus, and ego to convince you that you're smarter than the market. Individually, they may seem harmless. Together, they can slowly steal decades of financial opportunity. The encouraging news is that the opposite is also true. Small improvements made consistently can completely change your future. Every dollar you save instead of waste strengthens your financial foundation. Every book you read instead of every rumor you follow improves your decision-making. Every patient investment instead of every emotional reaction gives compounding another chance to work its quiet magic. Over time, these ordinary choices become extraordinary results. Warren Buffett often reminds us that someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. Your financial future is no different. The life you'll live 10, 20, or 30 years from now is being shaped by the decisions you make today. You don't have to become a billionaire to apply Buffett's wisdom. You simply have to become more disciplined than you were yesterday. So before you close this video, ask yourself one simple question. Which of these 8 mistakes has been quietly influencing your financial life? The moment you recognize it is the moment you gain the power to change it. Because your future isn't determined by the mistakes you've already made, it's determined by the decisions you choose to make from this day forward. If you found value in this documentary and want more timeless lessons inspired by Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and the world's greatest investors, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And if one idea from today's video changed the way you think about money, share it in the comments below. Your insight might become the lesson that changes someone else's financial future. Until next time, remember this: the goal isn't to get rich quickly. The goal is to become the kind of person who quietly builds wealth that lasts for generations.